Hello and welcome to Welty at Home. We are the slow reading virtual book club that alternates works by Eudora Welty with works by authors connected to Welty. As you know, we are currently discussing a selection of works by Welty and other authors that are all inspired by civil rights leader Medgar Evers. Today, we are going to discuss parts 3 through 5 of Turn Me Loose, The Unghosting of Medgar Evers by Frank X. Walker. We can even discuss the timeline and the audio resource provided by the author as well. This is a slight schedule change. We had originally planned to discuss the demonstrators today, but our discussion of Turn Me Loose has been so robust that we felt it deserved an extra session. So instead of being off next Monday, October 16th, as originally planned, we will meet on that date after all, and that's when we'll discuss Welty's short story, The Demonstrators. So thanks for bearing with us with this schedule change. I'm Jessica Russell. I'm the director of the Eudora Welty House and Garden, and I'm so grateful to be joined by Suzanne Mars, Eudora Welty's friend and biographer, professor emerita of Millsaps College, and I'm so thankful that she is moderating these discussions for us. Just some housekeeping. If you're new, to comment or ask a question, be sure to click the reactions button at the bottom of your screen and select the raise hand option. If you're on a tablet or phone, you might have to tap the screen for that option to appear, but that's what you want. And Suzanne and I will be looking for your raised hands. A lively discussion also takes place in the chat as well, so be sure to glance over at the chat box every now and then so that you don't miss out on that. And now, without further ado, Suzanne, shall we begin today's discussion?
Showtime. All right. I have a plan for today, but I know that you all can disrupt it, and you are free to disrupt it at any time. My plan is that we will first discuss the poems that Frank X. Walker said he found particularly compelling as he was writing them, the dream poems. And that then we will talk about the poems related to the song Dixie, and finally the poems related to the song Strange Fruit. Both songs run throughout the volume, but I think we'll focus our discussion on parts 3, Look Away, and part 5, Bitter Fruit. But there are references to those two songs throughout the volume, so we may want to bring up some other poems as well. All right, so let's start off by looking at the poems about Beckwith's dreams. And that first one is on page, I'm going to read all 3 of them, plus a 4th, Afterbirth, which is clearly related to the 3. So let me start on page 11, Byron Della Beckwith, Dreaming 1. And there is an epigraph here. There was a sign saying, "Welcome home, delay." When I got when I got in the outskirts of Greenwood, there was another one. It brought tears to my eyes. Okay, so here is Byron Della Beckwith, Dreaming 1. Mama's holding a baby with perfect blue eyes. She drops it when a tea kettle screams. She reaches for me, but I start to float away. There's a sound like a loud hand clap, and suddenly I'm floating face up in a thick, warm soup. The air smells like our bathroom when Willie's on the rag. I drink down all the soup, and a crowd gathers around me singing Dixie. All right, Dreaming 2 on page 27. Byron Della Beckwith, Dreaming 2. I'm driving a new white Cadillac, but instead of gunning it and kicking up red dirt, I'm joyriding Sunday slow on a country road of woolly black heads. I slam on the brakes, and suddenly I can hear them breathing. When I floor the pedal, they start to sing, and the faster I drive, the louder they howl. My steering wheel and windshield disappear. The leather seats turn to pine. The caddy rolls right into a church where somebody is beating the hell out of a tambourine, and it gets louder and louder and louder until my woman screams, and we both look down to see she has given birth to what we thought was a mongrel baby. But after I throw it in the Mississippi, I can see it was just covered with blood. And Dreaming 3 on page 43. I unzip my pants to piss, and my fingers pull out a long black snake. Willie reaches over, strokes it, and smiles. I squeeze my eyes shut and clear my head enjoy the weight of it in my hands, open my right eye to a squint, line up the crosshairs, take a deep breath, and smile back. And then the last one for this section, afterbirth, on the next page. It also has an epigraph from Beckwith, and I'm not going to read that, but I'll let you all read it for yourselves, and I'll start the poem. Like them, a man can conceive an idea, an event, a moment so clearly he could name it, before it breathes. We both carry a thing around inside for only so long, and no matter how small it starts out, it can swell and get so heavy our backs hurt, and we can't find comfort enough to sleep at night. All we can think about is the relief that waits at the end. When it was finally time, it was painless. It was the most natural thing I'd ever done. I just closed my eyes and squeezed, then opened them, and there he was, just laying there, still covered with blood. Laughs, but already trying to crawl. I must admit, like any proud parent, I was afraid at first, afraid he'd live, afraid he'd die too soon. Funny how life and death is a whole lot of pushing and pulling, holding and seeking breath, a whole world turned upside down until some body screams. All right. So what about those poems written from the perspective of Byron de la Beckwith and probing his subconscious mind? What can we say about those overall or singly? You want to talk about any one of them in particular? We'll do that. Anyone want to start us off? No takers? Well, let's start. Okay, Harriet. Thank you.
I'll plunge in and say, I would like to talk about some of, maybe one of these poems individually, but I'm interested in the thread of what I'll call psychosexual, with the emphasis on psycho. What interests me in the book, and it ties in with that terrible story that Frank X. Walker talked about, not finding his first publisher, objecting to the sexual imagery in the book. And I'm just thinking they didn't get it at all, if that's the case, because I'm thinking about the ways in which we move from the imagery in Byron de la Beckwith dreaming to of that baby that is born with associated with anxieties about fighting extinction of whiteness, the child that won't be white, and his poem titled "Fighting Extinction," and the imagery of sexuality and the race-sex complex. You know, that the Black man is a rapist as opposed to the white man who was, in fact, the rapist that we understand in Southern Bells, but all leading to these pregnancy images in the book. And I'm thinking of when death moved in, when we have Myrlie Evers telling the story of how death attached itself to our lives, first like an unplanned pregnancy, then like our fourth child. We didn't talk about its disfigured face or its crooked limbs and spine. We went about the people's business. I'm skipping a bit. Civil voting rights and demonstrations and primetime television put fat on its face. Images of Medgar escorting James Meredith into Old Miss was celebrated with new front teeth. When it crawled to the front door and spoke its first cuss words, It sounded like a car backfired twice. The imagery of a pregnancy coming from this psychosexual race sex syndrome is a monster child. And in Merle's poem, it is death. In Gilla Beckwith's, it is like them, like women, a man can conceive an idea, an event, a moment, and his triumph over Medgar Evers is the monster child in Afterbirth. So I'm just thinking about that thread throughout the book and how important it is to our understanding the history of race in the United States, not just in Gilla Beckwith's story, and images of rape, of protection of women, the idea of guarding female purity.
Take us back, Harriet, though. Let's talk about Beckwith, though. I want to talk about what the part of Beckwith that he's giving us. Then we'll come to those larger concerns, I think. But he's in the mind of Beckwith. He's in, as you say, psycho. We're in the mind of the psychopath here. Why is he doing that? What are we getting from that? And part of it is, in this mind of this psychopath, sex and violence are inextricably linked. Yeah. And I mean, his penis is a rifle. He wants to fire that gun. And there's that. You want to go into that? Why Beckwith?
Maybe we should focus on one of the poems.
Okay, let's just start. Yeah, the word scream, the word blood, the child, the idea of birth and of death, of life and death being linked. So let's start with the first one.
Okay.
On 11. Mama's holding a baby with perfect blue eyes. She drops it when a tea kettle screams. She reaches for me, but I start to float away. There is a sound like a loud hand clap, and suddenly I'm floating face up in a thick, warm soup. The air smells like our bathroom when Willie's on the rag. I drink down all the soup, and a crowd gathers around me singing Dixie. So there's the smell of blood. There is the scream from the mother. And he's thinking of that fulfillment of the smell of blood associated with murdering Evers. I drink down all the soup and a crowd gathers around me singing Dixie. And there's the song Dixie again. So what about this? Anyone want to talk about this poem and these images? And let me ask, I may be off on a wild hair here, but what about is the baby that gets dropped, is that Beckwith or is that some other baby? Is this a second birth for Beckwith when he comes out of in the thick warm soup? I don't know. What do you think, Susan?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, can.
I don't have a lot to say about it, but it just occurred to me, this is such a domestic poem, mama holding a baby, a tea kettle, this floating face up in thick warm soup, the bathroom, and then drinking down the soup. It could be a kind of loving domestic maternal scene, except the mother drops the baby, the tea kettle screams, and of course he's in the soup. So it's
metaphorically in the soup, huh?
Yeah. So it's interesting because it takes these images that you associate with comfort.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, they're nightmarish.
Yeah, it's very surreal, isn't it? G. Bear, what do you think? Oh, I thought that was G. Bear, is it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sure seems to me like this poem Beckwith is the baby.
Mhm.
And I noticed that in the second stanza, she drops it. He's depersonalized.
Mhm.
He dropped me. He
Yeah.
drops it. And
Yeah.
so, he's losing himself as a human. And then linking in with the other poems, you have something being birthed, and in this case, it's Beckwith, maybe even born innocent, but he's dropped and he's left in pain. And then, in subsequent poems, you have this birthing of his murderous desire, or birth of his racism expressing itself in murder, and the other two birthing poems, I think. So it seems like, he starts out, he's injured. He no longer sees himself quite as a real person. Um, and something new becomes born in him.
I think that's right, that it's a baby, he's distanced from himself, and then it's me. And it's a kind of birth of, his mother died when he was 12. His father died when he was 5. So he was orphaned, but his rebirth as a racist, as a murderer, and the crowd embracing him, I think. Adrian. We can't hear you yet, Adrian. Not
Sorry,
here.
I am
There
in
you
the
go.
car and I did not expect to be called on so quickly. I was just gonna say that the image of Byron being the baby very much connects to Merle Evers' last poem.
Yeah.
I think it's Sweet Peace and Time. I feel like I mangled the title a bit and I was looking it up. But yeah, very much that is a connection that I had not seen between those two poems before.
It's the gift of time, which I wanted to talk about later. And there she says, he was able to imagine that before he fell in love with guns, before he lost his mother in his childhood, before he needed a reason to hate, to feel threatened, to push back against imaginary walls collapsing on him. I saw, so she was finally able to imagine that before he fell in love with guns, before he lost his mother. So, yeah, so this is a poem I think about Beckwith being, to me, being born as the murderer, and Frank X. Walker trying to imagine how he got to that point, perhaps. Yeah. Harriet?
No, I didn't have, I was going to say what we've just said, that I was going to go to that last poem, Gift of Time, and the image of this, and the idea of damage to the child that is embedded in that image of, and I think I asked the same question about the first line, whether the baby with the perfect blue eyes is him who's floating away in a few more lines further, or if it is another child who is perfect and not him. So they're just very provocative internalizations of this persona.
His personality, the uncertainty of his identity for him. Yeah, and I think Susan's point about the domestic scene is really important too, and also links to the final poem. Let's look at the second one on page 27, Dreaming 2. This is where he's driving the car, and all of a sudden the car turns, a windshield and steering wheel disappear, the seats turn to pine, and he's in a church, evidently a black church. There's that hell of a tambourine beating, and then until my woman screams, and we both look down to see she has given birth to what we first thought was a mongrel baby, but after I throw it in the Mississippi, I can see it was just covered with blood. What about that dream that Beckwith has? Anyone to talk about that? Harry?
I'm still on it because what I notice about this poem is that each image turns from a kind of superiority of the driver in the Cadillac to loss of control. That is, I'm thinking that he is joyriding on a country road of woolly black heads. It's joyous, it's a joyride for him, riding over these woolly black heads. But then I slam on the brakes and suddenly I can hear them breathing. When I floor the pedal, they start to sing. And the faster I drive, the louder they howl. And then driving into the church, the caddy rolls right into a church. That's that imagery from the historical story of the horses going into a church and beating the occupants. The caddy rolls right into a church where someone is beating the hell out of a tambourine. That is, it turns into black joy rather than control. And then that final image of the child, which they kill, which turns out to be not the mongrel child, but their child. And so each of the images seem to me about Byron's loss of control.
Right. Yeah. G. Bear.
And once again, in the next to last stanza, the baby is an it. And there's no sense of remorse there. His sociopathy is on full display. He has no identification with other creatures as having feelings or relationship with them. They're all it's.
Yeah, even in the last line, and I can see it was just covered with blood when it would be his own.
Right.
There's a kind of, I think, a suggestion of the self-destructive nature of his racism. And I think that business about losing control. I've got a white Cadillac. Boy, I'm a rich guy. And then you've lost it, and it's turned to wood, and you're in the church, and you're listening to African Americans joyously performing in their church, and you've lost control. You've got there is that great fear, that total fear of mongrelization, loss of whiteness, and he destroys that, but in the process, he's destroying his offspring, and the self-destructiveness of that racism, I think, comes clear. Yeah. Let's look at the third one on 43, I think. Oh, this is the one I was already talking about, where he reaches in to pull out, to take a pee, and he pulls out a rifle and has it in his hands. But then he lines up the crosshair, takes a deep breath, and smile back. Yeah, Susan.
I just had a thought about blood.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have anything to do maybe with this poem, but he seems to misunderstand blood. He thinks about the blood of Willie's period menstrual cycle, the blood that is the afterbirth around this mongrel child, and he's interpreting that as something kind of dirty and violent rather than as something that's natural and part of a life cycle. Anyway, that's all I thought.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. Anything else about this poem, A Dreaming 3? This is where clearly we have sex and violence linked for the psychopath. There's a kind of self-hatred here too, I think, that comes through. A need for dominance, a need for self-assertion, linking violence and sex. Anything else about this? What about anything else about afterbirth? I think it's clearly linked to dreaming too. So when he shoots Beckwith, there he was. When he shoots Medgar Evers, there he was, just laying there, still covered with blood, but already trying to crawl. I must admit, like any proud parent, I was afraid at first, afraid he'd live, afraid he'd die too soon. Yeah, Joubert?
I was just going to go back to number 3, that relationship between he and Willie, both smiling back and forth each other at the unity of the sexual violence there in this together.
Yeah, close my eyes and squeeze. That's a line that's really in the previous poem as well. And the smiling, yeah. Okay. All right. Okay, so let's talk about the poems that are associated with the song Dixie. We all know this song. I'm going to read it anyway. I wish I was in the land of cotton. Old times there are not forgotten. Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland. In Dixieland where I was born, early on one frosty morn, look away, look away, look away, Dixieland. Oh, I wish I was in Dixie, away, away, 'cause in Dixieland I'll take my stand to live and die in Dixie. Away, away, away down south in Dixie. Away, away, away down south in Dixie. I almost broke into song. You're lucky I didn't. So, what about this song runs throughout the book? And how is Frank X. Walker using the song in the book, do you think? And the poems I want to look at specifically, well, let's start with a poem on page 12, early in the book, end of the first section. I wish I was in Dixie too, T-O-O. If your family's wealth depended on those you enslaved and the cotton they spun into gold, if your intellectual superiority depended on hundreds of years of denying literacy to others, while your color confirmed your right to do so, if the thought of being responsible for your own hoeing, planting, chopping, picking, smithing, raking, mucking, shoeing, milking, smoking, canning, baking, hauling, cooking, serving, sweeping, washing, ironing, fixing, nursing, mending, dusting, and cleaning makes you tired, then I understand why you love that song so much. So here is the first use of Dixie. Clearly, I wish I was in Dixie. Well, the only person who could wish they were in Dixie would be the people who do not want to be responsible for hoeing, planting, chopping, picking, smithing, and so on. The people who have had to do all that labor have no nostalgia for Dixie. Yeah, Beverly.
I hope can y'all hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Oh, good. I've switched computers. I was over on this other one and it didn't seem like the sound was coming through. I think that's a perfect poem of white privilege because, as we've gone through time and we've had, I'll use Ole Miss as an example, they got rid of Colonel Reb and they used to play Dixie. And of course, Elvis Presley sang Dixie. And I think for a long time, people just, said, well, what's the matter with that song? Well, here we have the perfect explanation of what's the matter with that song. I mean, this is it in a nutshell. I think very succinctly, 6 couplets, we have an understanding that would have been true at the time that Byron Della Beckwith was living in the South and singing Dixie, and the time that Medgar Evers was being assassinated here. But I think it's a perfect explanation of white privilege and the people who still say, well, I don't understand what the problem is.
And also of sentimentalizing the past, of viewing the past and of refusing to remember, of looking away from the reality of the past. Yeah, Joubert.
Perhaps it was when I just recently in the last week finished reading Jubilee by Walker, but maybe somewhere else I learned that Dixie was originally a vaudeville song performed by men in blackface. So the original version of the song was I guess a kind of grotesque, imagining that these were enslaved people that were wishing they were back doing this picking, smithing, raking, mucking, and it got appropriated because of the Confederacy sentimentality and the soldiers' sentimentality about being at home instead of being in Northern Virginia. But it has a strange origin, and it makes it even more offensive.
It does. That distort the happy darkies in the field image of Southern mythology, demolished here. Yeah, Susan.
Yeah, this poem, as it started off, made me think about Rudyard Kipling's "If." That probably we all had to memorize when we were in, or most, the older among us anyway, when we were in grade school or high school. And then I just started to realize it broke down. You know, the first two lines kind of works. And then, you know, if your intellectual superiority, and then he can't complete that thought in 3 lines. And he has to burst by that couplet. And then the next one starts, if the thought of you being responsible for your own, and all of a sudden we're, you know, he can't even quit. There,
Right.
how many things are they responsible for? And it just keeps going and keeps going and keeps going. And there's words
6
are so,
lines. Yeah, for 6 lines. Yeah.
yeah. And those words are so short that the action really makes you feel what he's talking about. And then
they're gerund, so they're ing forms of the verb, which suggests that ongoing action.
yeah, they never quit.
Yeah.
Then I understand why you love that song so much. I mean, it's just this guy is such a good poet. I can't, it's amazing to me. But I love this.
The words are handled here. The structure of the poem is handled. Yeah. Well, let's talk about section 3. Let me but first let me get Teresa in here.
Well, hey everyone, I have a question, and I don't want this to be misconstrued. Not all white people in the South owned slaves. And looking back at my own family history, I mean, we're from Appalachia on one side. So I feel like Frank Walker is lumping all white people in one bag. Is that his intent, or is it really just to show you how he feels and his perspective and the perspective of Black people? Because again, not all white people own slaves. That's not to say that, you know, racism wasn't spread across the gamut, but in looking at my family history, there was no slave ownership.
Most of slave owners did not own massive numbers of slaves. They owned, you know, probably 5 or fewer. I think that's what Charles Sallis taught me a long time ago. But there were lots of slave owners in the South. Then there were the large plantation owners who owned many people. And then there were whites who did not own slaves. But I don't think he's suggesting that everyone owned slaves, but everyone in a sense was complicit with the system. And not resisting the system, and of perhaps even of aspiring to slave ownership if they didn't. So I don't think he's saying that. I think he's saying if your family's wealth depended on them, then I understand why you're saying. If your intellectual superiority, that's not ownership. If depended on hundreds of years of denying literacy to others, and Black people in the South were denied literacy. It was against the law. That's another issue, not of ownership. While your color confirmed your right to do so, that's another issue that's not, I think, slave ownership. Harriet?
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm thinking that he sort of addresses it when he comes to the poem White Nights, and he talks about the exceptions that are more than not slave owners. They are they are freedom fighters, I also think that that it's also addressed, say, in I'm thinking about the poem, and I don't remember which one it is now, in which
Big-hearted about Philip Beckwith talking about you've got to
no, I'm thinking
sort of thing.
I'm thinking of the one in which Willie says we stood by and watched them treat folks as if they were the mud under their feet, and
We were the rug. Yeah.
we didn't realize we were the rug. And so
Epiphany.
okay. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that he addresses it explicitly, which, and maybe feels the need to address it because of the kind of question that you're asking and feeling. Yeah.
Both of those poems, though, are more contemporary. They're not about the antebellum South, but I think, yeah. Okay.
Right.
Okay, what about Look Away? What about the point, the line Look Away, which becomes the title for part 3? And this may be also part of an answer to Teresa's question. Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland. What about that? Anyway, let me look at a specific poem. Let's look at Southern Bells on page 32. So this is in the section titled Look Away. Willie de la Beckwith speaking. There's an epigraph for this poem as well. White men would say they were going out to the quarters to have their luck changed. When our grandfathers strutted back from the slave quarters, still unzipped and whiskey-eyed, and on occasion forgetting it was a sweet Southern bell they were now ringing, when the mongrel evidence of their sins crowded the edge of the front porch or tiptoed round our kitchens with swollen bellies, thus began our great tradition of not knowing and not wanting to know, of never asking about what happened out there in the dark. But if you really know a man, you know that he loves and you know what ignites his lust, whether that be the peal and chime of a black woman's body or the silent one of her man. Okay, what about that? What about this poem? Is it tied to the song Dixie at all, do you think? You know, yeah, Harriet, and then Beverly, and then Teresa.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of what you can't see, of the crimes you don't want to see, of what you choose to not see, but I think that in the themes of the book as a whole, there's the emphasis on what we can't forget. I'm thinking about the last poem in the collection, and heavyweight, and the idea of the elephant that needs to that is Mississippi, and that needs to receive forgiveness, but must never, ever forget. And so the push of the book is to see what we have too easily turned our eyes from, and this poem suggests an origin to looking away.
And I think Teresa might, you can talk about this, but your grandfather did not have slave quarters. So this is a poem that you couldn't say it's my grandfather specifically, but I think when she says this, and I don't think Willie de Beckwith's grandfathers did either, I'd have to look back at her heritage, but our grandfathers are sort of our collective past, when our past allowed these men go and raping women in the slave quarters and raping their daughters even. This is Faulkner, we're talking Faulknerian kind of portrait here. And we never ask about it, where we turned our heads. Yeah. Well, we looked away. So that Look Away Dixieland is looking away from that heritage. Yeah, Beverly and then Teresa.
I think that Look Away fits here all the way back to slave times. You know, Harriet Jacobs said she wrote Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl to let white women know that the slave women were not seducing their husbands, that they were victims, that they were being raped and they were being taken advantage of, and that was really the purpose in her putting together that memoir. So all the way through history, you know, in the civil rights movement, you know, when all of these things were happening and people were still looking away, you know, they were complicit in their ability to not see, as Harriet said, to not see the atrocities that were being committed, to allow the murderers of Emmett Till to go free. You know, they're looking away. And Medgar Evers, of course, was trying to remedy that by giving people a voice, and the voice, of course, was the vote. So I think that tradition of looking away at what we find uncomfortable or what we find ugly or what we find horrifying has roots everywhere, not just in the South, but we certainly have those roots here.
Certainly. The poem No More Fear, which I wanted us to look at, addresses that, what you're just talking about, Beverly. 3 months before Emmett Till arrived, Reverend George Lee was killed by a shotgun blast to the face. It was ruled a traffic accident. 1 week before Emmett Till arrived, Lamar Smith voted in the Democratic Party and was shot at high noon in front of the county courthouse. There were no arrests. Medgar cried when he heard about young Till, and then Medgar finds witnesses, and one of the witnesses is Till's uncle, great uncle, Moses Wright. When Uncle Mose stood up in court and pointed and said, "Dar he," when Uncle Mose stood up in court, pointed right at J.W. Milan, identified him as the killer, we thought the air would split, but it didn't. So there is that looking away. Yeah, Teresa.
I think both Harriet and Beverly nailed it, but I remember reading something, and again, this whole subject has fascinated me for years. Remember reading some article somewhere at some point in time that local Ku Klux Klan members were kind of having issues because their daughter, who was white, had a child, and the child was of mixed race, and their values were being, you know, looked at. There, you know, lots of compromises had been made, and it's just, the whole subject is super complex. But I think that article really put it into hands to me that people who had all along believed one thing really had to step back and reevaluate things when they had a grandchild who was mixed race. There's so much here to unpack. It's I mean, we could go on for hours.
Yeah, Harry.
So I wanted to respond more to your thinking about the poem "No More Fear," as somebody who's worked on a book on literary responses to the Till murder in the way that we're doing with looking at literary responses to the Medgar Evers murder. But the thing is, until the moment of the Till murder, none of these events that are listed in, two of which are listed in No More Fear, got attention. They weren't seen. They were looked away from. And it took Mamie Till, who is my heroine, to make the country see her son's body. And one question that always comes up in relationship to the Till story is why? Why was this the moment when the country suddenly was willing to see in horror what was going on. It doesn't change the outcome, mind you, but it still was seen. And I think art is both a matter of changing times and television and being able to reach a national audience. But it was also this mother who insisted, when she was told that the body would be returned to her if she kept the casket closed, if she did not open it. And she went right ahead and opened it and put her mutilated son on display for the country to see. And so, No More Fear, I think, is a poem about that problem, about being able to list all of the murders that happened the week before Emmett Till was murdered, and that were not seen. And that at that moment when Mose Wright looked out from the courtroom and said, "Dar he," was a moment that in this poem opens up a seam that lets those fears out.
Yeah. And she said, it opened up a seam in that place where we kept all our fears. Yeah. I think, this is a powerful poem. No More Fear. And that moment of heroism from Mamie Till, from Medgar Evers, his heroism in and not accepting this and in finding witnesses, and Mose Wright's heroism.
Yeah.
One more thing about Southern Bells. I wanted to look at the last stanza of Southern Bells. The wife looking away from her husband, that is Willie looking away from the violence of her husband here. But if you really know a man, you know what he loves and you know what ignites his lust, whether that be the peal and chime of a black woman's body or the silent one of her man. And I think what is being suggested by the poem is that the white man sees this as a form of control of the black man, of violence against the black man. The sexual encounters with the white woman are motivated by hatred of the black man, as well as desire, maybe more than desire. Joubert.
I had that note, and I was going to say that very same thing. He's got two things that are driving him. One is sexual lust, and then the desire to prove to the black man that he can rape his wife and make it stick. And that degree of control and violence there, and the black man just has to stand there and be silent, is extraordinary level of abuse.
Let's look at Strange Fruit. Let's move on, Sarah. Maybe we've got 10 minutes left. So this is Billie Holiday made this song, well known. Southern trees bear strange fruit, blood on the leaves, blood at the root. Black bodies swinging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees. Pastoral scene of the gallant South, the bulging eyes and the twisted mouth, scent of magnolias, sweet and fresh, then the sudden smell of burning flesh. Here's a fruit for the crows to pluck, for the rain to gather, for the wind to suck, for the sun to rot, for the trees to drop. Here's a strange and bitter crop. So the Gallant South, that title for section 4 comes from this song, Gallant South, and it's used ironically as the song uses it. And the final section of the poem, Bitter Fruit, comes from this song as well. Here's a strange and bitter crop. So let's talk about bitter fruit. And the last section of the poem, section of the book is called Bitter Fruit. What do you make of that decision? So here's a song that runs throughout the volume as well. In the first section, Beckwith is labeled Rotten Fruit. What he learns from his grandfather, fishing, how to pick your spot, the catching of the catfish and the flopping of the catfish body associated with sexual experience as well, and death. And here is the rotten fruit that's come from that training with his grandfather. But now we have not rotten fruit, but bitter fruit. Why do you think that is the shift here and what's going on? If we look at those last poems, let's look at 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, just to start with. That's the first poem in this section. Bitter fruit. You got old plantations, we got shotgun houses. You got sprawling verandas, we got a front porch. You got beautiful gardens, we got cotton fields. You got Ole Miss Law School, we got Parchman Prison. You got Gulf Shores beaches, we got riverbanks. You got debutante balls, we got juke joints. You got bridge parties, we got dominoes and spades. You got mint juleps, we got homemade hooch. You got your grandmother's china, we got paper plates. You see a proud history, we see a racist past. You don't remember lynchings, we can't forget. You got blacks, we got the blues. All right, so bitter fruit. That's the first poem in a section called Bitter Fruit. What do you make of that? Anyone? Harriet?
A couple things. I'm thinking of Bitter Fruit was the name of the poem that the song came from. But this book seems to play with it in a sense that this final section is a bitter fruit maybe for Beckwith as we move to a more positive vision. We're not there yet with 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. We are in the counterpoint that so much of the book is organized by. That is, there are so many ways of organizing these poems, and I noticed that in the reading that we may have listened to between in this last week, where there's historical context and songs and the poems that Frank X. Walker has reorganized the narrative by changing the order of the poems, and we're doing that again today as we select out the DeLay Beckwith poems maybe and focus on the look away. But the organization of the poem is just filled with say, poems that are two poems, one point of view and another point of view, and then a third poem, which is the truth of the two poems together. So the bitter fruit is you got blacks, we got the blues, but we're going to move to a moment of Byron Beckwith finding that the lynching scene that he imagines feeling is well, I don't even know if that's in this section. Maybe I'm wrong about that. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, so bitter fruit could be the bitter fruit for Beckwith, who realizes that times have changed. It used to be, this would be the kind of talk we'd have at the barbershop. We don't do that. That's not happening anymore. I think also bitter fruit is that we are paid that a high price has been paid for the blues, but the blues are worth having. The blues are a vital form of music that express a human experience and take out of pain, make something wonderful. And out of horrible, horrible sacrifice, something vital can be born. The fruit, it's fruit, but it's bitter. So that bitter fruit is a kind of oxymoronic expression. What is true is it is bitter, it is horrible, but there's also something valuable that emerges. And one thing that they talk about here is the blues, the vote, the young white protesters who are participating. So yeah, Beverly, I'll stop.
I think too, in bitter fruit, in each of these, I think in all of them in this last section, like you said, and I think Harriet said this as well, you are seeing change, because in the first one, you know, there are some positives there. Then in the second one, a final accounting, you can fill your libraries with versions of facts and call it history, but still not own the truth, although there are some states that are trying to own the truth right now. Then we've got Barack Obama in the third one. We have the Black president. And then we have the epiphany that was mentioned earlier, Willie's realization that they very possibly were being used by the rich people like Byron de la Beckwith, and like the ones that are actually committing the murders and committing the crimes were being egged on by the governors and the senators and the powers that be. And then we have Byron de la Beckwith in hell, perhaps his last meal before hell. So
I
in
love,
each
it,
one of,
I love it when Byron de la Beckwith looks up and sees God as that bronzed face.
yeah. So we, you know, we see some positive changes that have been made that came out of the horror of the deaths, not just Medgar Evers' deaths, but the other ones that were mentioned too. So while the fruit may have been bitter to the African American community and the white community that want to change, the bitter fruit here is change has come, change is coming, and there's not anything you can do about it.
Yeah. So if we look at the final poem, Heavy Weight. If Mississippi is to love her elephant self, she needs a memory as sharp as her ivory tusk, with as many wrinkles as her thick, thick past. If she forgets, she need only reach back, caress her keloid skin, and run her fingers across the braille history raised on her spine, or the bruised couplets round her supple neck. For Mississippi to love her elephant self, she need only open her blue-gray eyes and move as if she carries the entire weight of history and Southern guilt on her massive head. Move in any direction as long as it is forward. For Mississippi to love her elephant self, she must ask for, extend, and receive forgiveness, but she must never, ever forget. I love that. Ask for, extend, and receive forgiveness. All three, yeah. But she must never, ever forget. So acceptance, forgiveness, mercy, but also memory. The importance of memory. And Myrlie Evers' poem, The Gift of Time, is a kind of suggests that miraculous ability to forgive on Myrlie Evers' part. When I was able to see beauty in a world littered with scars, when I discovered stores of memories that a bullet couldn't quit, when I watched a son grow into his father's face, his laugh, his walk, I saw how faith can be restored. So, and the forgiveness that she extends then even to Byron de la Beckwith, and was finally able to imagine that before he fell in love with guns, before he lost his mother and his childhood, before he needed a reason to hate, to feel threatened, to push back against imaginary walls collapsing in on him like August heat and no fan. I imagined before all that, little Byron was good. He was clean. He was innocent. And I finally understood that trouble don't last always. I'm not sure I could come to that kind of realization, but I think the poem rightly points to the fact that Myrlie Evers has. Yeah. Anything else we want to say about Turn Me Loose, the unghosting of Medgar Evers, poems by Frank X. Walker? Final comments? I am so grateful that Frank X. Walker spent an hour with us. I'm so grateful that we had the video, the audio tape with its wonderful performances of music and historical perspective. And I'm so glad we've had our discussions. Teresa, shall I let you have one word here?
I think that the book ends on a hopeful note, and it's similar to many Holocaust stories too, where the message is forgiveness and remembering, not to ever forget. There are a lot of similarities there.
Yes. I think that's a really good comparison, Joe. And it does end on a hopeful note. It is bitter, but it's still fruit, stillborn fruit. And it's up to us that it still continues to bear fruit. I think that's hopefully less and less bitter. All right, Jessica, I'll turn it back to you.
Well, thank you everyone for a great discussion, and we'll see you again next Monday when we discuss The Demonstrators by Eudora Welty. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.